And we will now move to the second backbench business debate on pension schemes. I am pausing very briefly to allow a change of dramatis personae, and that has been accomplished. So I call Mr. Alistair Carmichael to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I first of all place on record my gratitude to the Backbench Business Committee for allowing us time to debate this today. For me, it's a return to an issue that I last spoke about in a half-hour debate in Westminster Hall on the 17th of January. But since then, there have been a number of significant developments that have taken place, not least the third report of this session from the Select Committee, and I'm delighted to see the Select Committee Chair in his place. The report is tagged for this debate, and it is a good and substantial piece of work. I'll touch on it towards the end of my comments, if I may. It is, though, I think, also the case that as events have unfolded for the various pension schemes in the last few months, that what I spoke about in January as being pertinent particularly to the beneficiaries of the defined benefit schemes in BP and Shell, actually begins to look more like a wider course of conduct. And there are some significant developments underway, not least the government's recent consultations, which could shape significantly the way in which these defined benefit pensions treat their beneficiaries in the future going forward. So, whereas I thought initially I was dealing with a couple of oil companies, I see subsequently I've seen that there's a whole range of different companies. Just yesterday, I read a quite alarming brief from the pensioners of Hewlett-Packard. So it's pretty clear that as this area of pension policy develops, there are going to be an ever larger number of the large corporates taking the same path that BP and Shell have taken, and ultimately it will be our constituents as beneficiaries that will lose out if we get it wrong and if they are allowed to do just as they wish to do rather than they ought to do with regard to the position of their pensioners. I'll happily give way.
Really grateful to the Right Honourable Member for securing the debate and giving way at this point. I've been contacted by 3 retired members from ExxonMobil, who have a very large refinery in my constituency. I was reluctant to name the firm because I haven't had a chance to ask them for their side of the story, but these 3 letters tell me that exactly the same thing has been happening to them, that they were given no discretionary rise this January. It was then modestly reinstated after protests were made, but clearly some sort of coordinated effort is going on and not in a good way, exactly as he describes.
I'm grateful, and actually it pains me to say it, but I think the Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. But what might start with oil and gas companies is clearly something that is going much more widely. I suppose, Madam Deputy Speaker, I should really declare an interest as somebody who at some point, I hope, if I live that long, will be a recipient myself or a beneficiary myself of a defined benefit pension, having been here before the House moved to career average earnings in 2011. I'm not going to rehearse what I said about the decision of BP and Shell and others not to pay that discretionary increase, which did matter significantly to their pensioners at a time when inflation was running at 10–11% and north of that even. But I do think it is worth reminding the House that there is a quite fundamental point of fairness at stake here. When one is past retirement age, one no longer has the choices that one has when one is of working age. So if when you're in employment you are unhappy with the money that you get for the work that you do, You can look around, you can find another job, you may choose to retrain and do something else that is more profitable. Once you are of retirement age, you no longer have that choice and that flexibility. And that's why it has long been established as a matter of public policy that the beneficiaries of pension schemes, this is after all simply deferred income, this is us being paid later after we've stopped working for the service that we've done, the beneficiaries of pension schemes require protection. And I think it is a fundamental aspect of that protection that it should take as its starting point the undertakings that were given. Now, in relation to BP and Shell, and I have no doubt also ExxonMobil, people were given quite vigorous encouragement to join pension schemes and to invest in them. They were given undertakings at the time that one of the advantages of a big pension scheme for a company like that was that they would later in life have an income that was protected against inflation. So there is a question of good faith at play here. I have no doubt that for many of the big corporates, the BPs, the Shells, the Hewlett-Packards, whatever else it is, that the possibility of paying money to those who are no longer economically active and contributing to their business is tiresome and inconvenient. But what never ceases to amaze me is the extent to which those at the top of these big corporates seem to think that somehow the corporates, as big as they are, simply because of the role that they've played, they don't seem to understand that they are the inheritors of businesses that were built by others, and those others are now amongst those who would be the pension beneficiaries. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, if one is to stand on the shoulders of others, then it is always good to respect the fact that you only enjoy the view you have because of the shoulders on which you stand. That, I'm afraid, is something that seems to have been forgotten within the boardrooms of too many of our large corporates. The concerns that I expressed before about BP in particular, and I would remind the House that I have a large number of BP pensioners in my constituency because BP for many years operated the oil terminal at Sullom Voe. They were a good employer and we valued their presence in the community for many decades. But it does concern me now to see that in relation to the BP pension fund trustees with a collective 94 years of membership of the fund have been replaced with 4 with precious little involvement, 2 in fact of whom are US citizens. And it is also the case that since we last debated this issue, both Shell and BP have again refused any discretionary increase to their beneficiaries. They are essentially doubling down. The briefing that's given to me today by the Shell Pensioners Association is one that concerns me particularly. And I'm just for they've crafted it very succinctly and concisely, so I'm just going to read it into the record with your indulgence, Madam Deputy Speaker. They write to me, Shell has imposed this benefits cut upon its pensioners during a period when the fund was in healthy surplus and well able to afford full cost of living increases without call upon Shell's sponsor covenant. And Shell, its shareholders and senior executives benefited hugely from the same energy crisis that was already causing their pensioners extremely high rises in their cost of living. They have done some considerable detailed research on this point, and they conclude from the actuarial reports of the scheme's accounts that during the same period, instead of a balanced approach using about 25% of the surplus, as quoted by Shell as necessary for a full cost of living increase, to the immediate benefit of the 93% of members whose pensions are currently deferred or in payment, the trustee has largely opted to dissipate the surplus by massively accelerating completion of its low-reliance investment transition plan. This 15-year plan was commenced in 2018, but with the acceleration opportunity provided by the surplus arising from increased bond yields, was almost fully completed in 2022. So that's where the money that could have funded the pension increases has gone. It has gone into accelerating a programme that was supposed to take 15 years and instead has been concluded in 4. They also, I'm afraid to say for the Minister, have strong concerns about the consultation that he launched on the 24th of February under the heading of Options for Defined Benefit Scheme. They say we are therefore aghast that the Pension Minister opened a new consultation with a view to identifying ways of encouraging and enabling sponsors of direct benefit schemes to claw back surpluses. We feel that the foregoing demonstrates that sponsors require no assistance or encouragement in that, and on the contrary, stronger measures are necessary to hold the surplus for the benefit of the beneficiaries, particularly in contributory schemes in which they have invested their own money by way of deferred salary and additional voluntary contributions. This is a matter in respect of which the Select Committee report has given careful consideration. And I think that I, along with most of those whom I speak to, are well pleased with the recommendations of the report in that regard. With regard to BP, they too continue to double down. There continues to be no formal engagement with the pensioners group, what the previous Chief Executive Officer called the zero engagement strategy. I would have loved to have been at their AGM this year. It sounds like it was quite a heated affair by all accounts. But the analysis of it, published recently in the Times by their financial editor, ties in very well what BP are doing with the concerns about what we should all have about the future direction of travel here. And he wrote in a recent article, everyone at least pays lip service to the notion that meeting pension promises in full is paramount. No surplus should be touched without a meaty asset buffer built up. No sponsor should be allowed to extract cash without showing a strong covenant, providing reassurance that it will still be around to pick up the pieces if things go wrong. But even those safeguards aren't nearly enough to fully protect members, according to a trenchantly argued submission from a Ginger Group BP Pension Fund members in the BP pension groups. Attempts by employers to evade their promises will be legion, it says. They will trim back or remove any benefit possible. They will abuse loopholes in the rules to maximise their clawbacks. They will push hard to minimise what members should reasonably expect. It also warned that the prospect of executive bonuses being fattened up by success in grabbing back surpluses will be far more potent in driving company behaviour than any residual feeling of responsibility to ensure schemes pay every last penny of promised pensions. The message is that it could all end up in an unseemly scramble. The BP dispute is just a foretaste of how relations between many other defined benefit pension fund members and their former employers are going to sour if the surplus grabbing reforms are pushed through without proper safeguards. The old world, he writes, is dead. And I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, that sums up very well the tension between surplus pullbacks and the need to honour the commitments that were given to beneficiaries. And it seems to me that we're back again in the territory that we see so often at the moment, where there is this mismatch between the ability of the individual citizen to take on the big corporate or the big public body. This is just the private sector version of what happened to the sub-postmasters. The post office were big enough and strong enough and well enough connected simply to be to ignore the sub-postmasters, to lie about them, to straight back their concerns, to deny what was obvious to everyone until they could no longer manage to do so. So, what is the agenda here? And who is ultimately going to be the winners and the losers? And it's pretty obvious that it will not be the pensioners themselves that are the winners. I mean, I consider the reputational damage that this is doing to BP and Shell. Now, obviously, if you're an oil and gas company these days, you have to be a fairly thick-skinned corporate entity. But still, I ask myself, why are they simply refusing to engage? Why are they denying the very obvious and clear justice of the case from their own pensioners' groups? And I find it difficult to see any other explanation other than that essentially these funds are being fattened up for being hived off to insurance companies or others. I would also say, in passing, that the Times, the Thunderer, is not the only news outlet to have reported on BP in relation to pensions recently. The PR Newswire on the 29th of March of this year reported a case in Houston, Texas, where BP had been told by a judge that it must reform its pension plan following an 8-year legal battle over pension losses. This again comes back to the fact that you're dealing with big corporates who have got deep pockets and can see off the attention of the small pension beneficiaries. A group of Standard Oil of Ohio oil workers received a winning decision after an 8-year legal battle with BP Corporation North America, Inc., in a huge victory for oil workers, with a federal judge ruling that BP committed, and this is worth paying attention to, that BP committed fraud or similarly inequitable conduct in how it announced a pension formula change 30 years ago. Federal Judge George C. Hanks, Jr. ruled that BP violated the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974 and that the plaintiffs, that is the workers, were entitled to appropriate redress by equitable relief. The court ruled plaintiffs demonstrated BP committed multiple violations of ERISA in its communications to its employees. The Ohio retirees maintained since 1989 that BP had insisted the new formula would provide benefits as good or better than the old formula. The judge agreed and found there is a pension shortfall for many. It's worth, though, reflecting exactly what the people who took that case were motivated by, the work that they had done for BP. Fritz Gunther, the lead plaintiff, dedicated his work life to BP, often in dangerous conditions on the North Slope of Alaska. He worked 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off for years, relying on BP's representations regarding his retirement. While he's still healthy, he says many of his colleagues face health issues, while others still have died within the last 8 years. The retirees' legal fight is taking place against a backdrop of retirement wave nationwide, with the US Census Bureau estimating that 1 in 5 Americans will each reach the age of 65 or older by 2030. That was the nature of the commitment that BP employees in America gave to the company, and it is a measure of the moral bankruptcy that there appears to be at the heart of that corporate, that they could not see that there was a necessary payback for these people in their retirement. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want just to touch very briefly on the Select Committee report to which I have referred. And I apologise for doing something that I was always told as a law student not to do, and I'm going to read from the rubric rather than the substance of the debate itself. But in particular, can I welcome what the Select Committee say with regard to scheme surplus and indeed also in relation to governance. In particular, that part of the executive summary where they say many schemes are much closer than they expected to being able to enter a buyout arrangement with an insurer to secure scheme benefits. That is what I have touched on earlier. They're also right in talking about the various reasons why the effective or the flexibility would be advantageous to wider interests. So there is a balance to be struck here between the company, the beneficiary and indeed the national interest in relation to having that money available for investment. But that balance has got to be properly struck, and the balance will inevitably slew towards the interests of government and corporate unless the necessary the protections are put in place. The Select Committee also observes that we note the current consultation on the level of funding a scheme would need to have for surplus extraction to be an option. However, strong governance will also be essential. We recommend that the DWP should conduct an assessment of the regulatory and governance framework that would be needed to ensure member benefits are safe and take steps to mitigate the risks before proceeding. I think in the brave new world into which we emerge in terms of defined benefit pensions, that is a warning that the Minister and the Government would do well to take on board. If they don't, I'm afraid that the losers at the end of the day will be our constituents, the beneficiaries of these pension schemes, and we will look back in years to come and see what BP, Shell, ExxonMobil, Hewlett-Packard and others simply have done to be simply the canaries in the coal mine.
The question is, as on the order paper. Chairman of the Select Committee, Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome this debate and congratulate the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland on securing it at a time when a lot is happening in pensioners' policy. And I want to take advantage of the broad title of the debate to comment on some of the wider issues, as well as picking up the points that the Right Honourable Gentleman has already made. And I agree with a great deal of what he's just said. But I think the position we're in at the moment is auto-enrolment, which was devised under a Labour government, legislated for under the coalition, and implemented under subsequent Conservative governments, has been a huge success in increasing the number of employees saving for a pension. But a lot of challenges remain. And above all, the amounts that people are saving under auto-enrolment are not enough for an adequate retirement income. And if we don't increase pension saving soon, we will have a crisis of inadequate pension incomes before very long. The gender pension gap remains much too big. Pension saving amongst self-employed people to whom auto-enrolment doesn't apply has plummeted. And the Chancellor, I think rightly, is looking at how we can boost investment into the UK economy from pension funds. But UK pension funds, for understandable reasons, some of which were touched on by the Right Honourable Gentleman in his opening remarks, they've largely withdrawn from investments into companies as regulation has pushed them to reduce the risks that they face. And one thing that we very much must not do is force those funds, defined benefit funds, which are still open and investing, to close prematurely. But the Right Honourable Gentleman has highlighted this afternoon, as he has done previously, and he mentioned his debate in Westminster Hall, that members of some defined benefit pension schemes, such as those for BP and Shell, and indeed I think ExxonMobil as well, as the Right Honourable Gentleman for New Forest East pointed out, they have not in recent years received the discretionary increases which they used to. And we looked at this in the Select Committee report on defined benefit pension schemes, which we published on the 26th of March. We took evidence, oral evidence, from the BP Pensioner Group, and we also heard from the Hewlett-Packard Pension Association, and the right honourable gentleman has mentioned that company as well. That association represents people who previously worked for the computer company Digital, which Hewlett-Packard then acquired. And much of the working life of those people was before 1997. There was no general requirement to uprate pensions in payment before 1997, and our witness told us that they had received, this is Hewlett-Packard pensioners, had received only 3 discretionary increases to pre-1997 benefits, amounting to 5% in total since 2002, in just over 20 years. So we called in our report for the pensions regulator to find out how many schemes had discretionary increases on pre-1997 benefits in their rules, how this discretion has been exercised in recent years, and also that DWP, given recent improvements in scheme funding levels, should look at ways to ensure that scheme members' reasonable expectations for benefit enhancement are met, particularly where there has been a history of discretionary increases. For scheme members with a lot of pre-1997 service, I wonder if the Minister, when he winds up, would comment on whether he will be looking at how their reasonable expectations for benefit entitlements, benefit enhancements can be met. The Hewlett-Packard Association is calling for a code of ethical practice to be drawn up between the pensions regulator and DWP, particularly about pre-1997 pensions, and for their former employer and its pension trustees to work out a policy for sustainable future discretionary increases.
Would the Honourable Gentleman...
Yes, I will. Yeah.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman because he's touching now on an area that I should perhaps have given more attention to. And it is that the most important protection you can give the beneficiaries is through independent trustees. And to ensure that the office of trustee is not one that can be manipulated by the company. Does the Select Committee have any proposals for improvement in that?
Well, I think the right honourable gentleman is quite right. And one of the things that we've been noting is there is a bit of a move towards sole trustees in a number of cases, and clearly that does give rise to some concerns about how one person will be able to represent the interests of the members of a pension scheme. So we are reflecting on that in the work that we're doing. But one of the members of the Hewlett-Packard scheme wrote to me, and well, they've written to other members. He wrote to me this week about, and I quote, the further fear and despair they are now feeling as it dawns upon them that their company and pension scheme trustees are meanwhile preparing plans to de-risk by transferring their pensioner responsibilities to an insurance company. The right honourable gentleman touched on this. That transfer quite possibly meaning, to continue the quote, no subsequent possibility ever for pre-1997 increases. And he calls that, I quote, a frightening prospect, and it's hard to disagree. Madam Deputy Speaker, the committee also looked at concerns over the new defined benefit funding regime to be introduced for scheme valuations from September. We noted that this regime had been developed in a different era where the vast majority of defined benefit schemes were in deficit, and amidst concern that employers were seeking to evade their responsibility to underfunded schemes. There have been big changes since then, especially in the wake of the LDI crisis following the budget of 18 months or so ago. In particular, there have been significant improvements in scheme funding, but the principles of this new regime have not been changed. Schemes are expected to target a position of low dependency on the sponsoring employer, meaning low investment risk, at the point of significant maturity. And this has prompted concerns that the funding code, when it's introduced, will force more unnecessary de-risking, particularly amongst open schemes, but also amongst schemes which are closed but have long time horizons, and that will increase costs to employers and result in premature closure. So we said that DWP and the pensions regulator needed to, quoting from our report, act urgently to ensure they do not inadvertently finish off what few open schemes remain by further increasing the risk aversion. In a letter to the committee on the 18th of December, the Minister told us that both the Department and the pensions regulator were acutely aware of the need to take account of the specific needs of open schemes, and he agreed that, and I quote, open schemes should not be forced into an inappropriate de-risking journey. We welcome that assurance, but that needs now to be reflected in the final wording of the funding code and in the regulator's approach. The vote in Parliament on the statutory instrument on this came before the final version of the funding code was published, so members didn't quite know what they were voting for at that point. We recommended that the Department and the pensions regulator should work with open schemes to address their concerns, particularly around the employer covenant horizon, that is, the length of time they can say they are confident in the sponsoring employer's willingness and ability to support the scheme, and report back to us on how they will do so before the new funding code is laid before Parliament. Feedback from schemes since our report was published suggests things may not be moving in the right direction. In a consultation response last week, the university superannuation scheme described the regulators, which is a very large and still open scheme, described the regulator's proposed approach as, I quote, not fit for purpose for open defined benefit schemes. In its view, completing the statement that they'll be required to complete under the terms of the new code, completing that review would demand, I quote, significant resource for little or no benefit to our members. To them and to me, this does appear inconsistent with the assurances that open schemes will not be adversely impacted by the new funding regime. They add, not having had sight of the revised funding code and accompanying covenant guidance has exacerbated the worries that they have. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that the Minister understands these concerns well, that premature closure of these schemes would reduce pension fund investment in the productive economy at a time when the Chancellor wants, absolutely rightly, to increase investment from pension schemes into the productive economy. So I wonder if the Minister can tell us, in winding up, when he expects the new funding code to be published, whether he'll report back to the committee before then on how the concerns of open schemes have been addressed, and whether he can tell us whether he's open to considering a separate chapter in the funding code setting out how the code will apply to open schemes. I wonder, Mr. Deputy Speaker, whether I can just take a few minutes also to talk about what's happening on the defined contribution side of the picture. Yeah, I'm glad to give way. Yeah.
I'm very grateful to the Chair of the Select Committee for giving way. I just wondered whether he shares my concern that when these schemes go wrong, it seems to take an interminable time to get any form of resolution. And I have in mind one that I'm sure he's familiar with, the Atomic Energy Authority Technology Pension Scheme, where the government gave strong guarantees from the dispatch box that transferring into this scheme would give roughly a very similar benefits to remaining in the original Atomic Energy Authority scheme, and that didn't happen. And I see it was in 2016 that I first quoted the concerns of my constituent, Dr. Keith Brown, and my most recent answer to a question on this subject was that it's a complex issue requiring further consideration between the DWP and the Cabinet Office. And that was 2016, and now they're still saying this in 2024.
I think the Right Honourable Gentleman makes a very fair point. That particular case certainly is a very long-running one indeed. And the Select Committee has recently been looking at a notable pension scam case, the Norton Motorcycle pension schemes, which was a straightforward scam, and that's been running on for years and years. And I do think he's right that we need to find ways to speed up some of these processes, because those who are the victims in these cases have their lives really blighted. And the fact that we're allowing the blight to last for years and years and years, I think, does need some change. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on the defined contribution schemes, we published a report in September 2022 on saving for later life, which did point out that auto-enrolment has been a very big success, doubling the proportion of eligible workers saving in a pension. I applaud the approach now being taken by Uber, following the Supreme Court judgment, which it lost, and the agreement that it now has, a recognition agreement with the trade union, the GMB, and they are now auto-enrolling large numbers of their drivers into a pension scheme, albeit with higher opt-out rates than elsewhere. That is making some real inroads into pension scheme saving in the gig economy that we need much more of amongst other gig economy workers. But many auto-enrolled people are not contributing enough at the moment for an adequate retirement income. And quite a lot of them are probably not aware of that. Contribution rates need to go up. So we recommended the government should first implement recommendations in the 2017 auto-enrolment review, reducing the minimum age for auto-enrolment from 22 to 18, and minimum contributions being paid from the first pound of earnings. Almost all our witnesses supported those measures. We welcome royal assent for the legislation to implement them. That legislation requires a public consultation on implementation and the findings to be reported to Parliament before the regulations are made, but there has as yet been no consultation, no date announced for the consultation either. So I wonder if the Minister can tell us when the Department will be consulting on implementation of those regulations. Will that consultation be launched before the end of this Parliament? And does the Minister still expect, as the Government has long maintained, that those changes will be implemented by the mid-2020s? We always knew auto-enrolment would lead to many small pension pots. People change jobs, so they accumulate on average 10 pension pots across a working life. By November 2022, there were over 12 million deferred pots under £1,000. The DWP has proposed automatic default consolidation to deal with small pots, but that won't in itself stop small pots building up in future. So the Department has proposed a lifetime provider model. Member choice, so that employees would tell their employer which pot to put their contributions into, and pot for life, so that employees stay in the pension scheme they started out in throughout their working lives, unless they choose to move. Now, consultation responses on this raise some very serious concerns from the TUC, Age UK, the Pension and Lifetime Savings Association, the Association of British Insurers, so the main industry bodies. Age UK, for example, said the proposals would be, and I quote, highly disruptive and lead to poor outcomes for mass market savers. Major concerns raised in the responses are potentially unwinding the consensus around auto-enrolment, that other measures in train, pensions dashboards, value for money, consolidation, will reduce the number of small pots anyway and improve value, that the proposals would benefit savers with larger pots but harm lower income savers, that they would increase employers' costs, while removing entirely their role in selecting a pension scheme for their staff. And I've heard, and I'm sure the Minister has, time and time again, how important employers are to trust in pension savings, and also that employers have delivered in auto-enrolment what we asked them to deliver. That these changes would require a new infrastructure, which would be hard to build, as pension dashboards have certainly proved to be, and they distract attention from the important effort to increase auto-enrolment contributions over time, which the responses argue, I think correctly, should be the main focus of changes over the next few years. Now, the Minister will be very familiar with all those concerns. Will he tell us when the Department will publish its response to the Lifetime Provider Model consultation? And I wonder if he'd acknowledge that responses to that consultation so far have indicated the very significant risks in the proposal that the government came forward with for rather limited gains. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, there is a lot going on in this area. I am very grateful to the Right Honourable Member for giving the House the opportunity to reflect on all this at this particular time. There has been some good progress, for example, with auto-enrolment, but there's a lot more work that's needed, and I'm looking forward to hearing the Minister's reply.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it's a pleasure to follow the Chair of the Select Committee, and indeed also thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for securing the debate today. It gives us a chance to raise a number of issues, and I've listened with interest, particularly in relation to the remarks in relation to defined benefit schemes, but also the recent report of the Select Committee, which is what I want to refer to today, Mr Deputy Speaker. I speak today as a constituency MP for Cardiff South and Penarth on behalf of the many individuals who are affected by the collapse of the Allied Steel and Wire pension fund, which of course not just affected constituents in Cardiff South and Penarth, but across South Wales, but also in other locations across the UK. And I have regularly met with constituents and others affected by that terrible injustice over the time I've been in this House, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I've heard the very heartbreaking and passionate way in which they make the case that they put into a pension scheme expecting a defined benefit after many years of service in a tough industry in steel making, which has a proud tradition in my constituency as it does across South Wales, and yet they have not received what they paid in for. And that is essentially because the employees who were members of the schemes, in particular the ASW pension plan and the ASW Sheerness Steel Group pension fund, both wound up underfunded and ended up essentially having to rely on the financial assistance scheme, which, as has been said before, provides financial assistance to members of defined benefit pension schemes who lost all or part of their pension following the scheme coming to an end between the 1st of January 1997 and the 5th of April 2005. Now, the arrangements that were made, Mr Deputy Speaker, resulted in theory, members receiving broadly equivalent to 90% of the expected pension. That's obviously less than they expected to receive. But this could be reduced if it was above the FAS cap. And of course, for members who had paid in substantial amounts before the 5th of April 1997, they did not receive that index linking, which has meant that the value of their pensions and pension pots has been substantially reduced. Now, for the funding that went in after that date, even that, of course, is not going to have kept pace with actual inflation, because it was related to up to a maximum of 2.5% increase. So the net result has been that many of them have received somewhere between 40 or 50% less than they felt that they were entitled to. Many who had paid in good faith. They've often explained to me very clearly, Mr Deputy Speaker, how they were originally sold the schemes, told it was going to be absolutely solid as the steel that they were working on, and yet found themselves in real difficulties in later life. And sadly, Mr Deputy Speaker, many of those members of that scheme have since passed away, or suffered illness, financial hardship, mental distress, and many other issues during that time. I'll happily wait.
I thank the honourable member for giving me, and he's raised a point that I've been particularly concerned about. I have constituents who've come to me recently facing problems getting their pension entitlement actually from Police Scotland, public sector pensions. And one of the lessons that we need to learn from these continual scandals is that we need to act quickly, because the longer we take, the more people lose out, people pass away, and they never get the justice they deserve.
The point that she makes, indeed, this is reflected in what the Select Committee set out, which I'll come on to in a moment. And quite understandably, Mr Deputy Speaker, those pensioners have made clear to me that they see themselves in the ilk of other huge historic injustices, as we've heard in recent months with the sub-postmasters and the Horizon scandal, as we've heard with the infected scandal. And obviously, the longer and longer that this goes on, the more and more pain and financial distress and mental distress they endure. And of course, tragically, many pass without receiving anything that they were entitled to, or certainly not the full amount. And I have met with numerous pensions ministers and written to numerous pensions ministers and written many times. I've spoken in this House many times. I've told the stories of these pensioners a number of times. I do want to thank also colleagues on the shadow benches, in particular my colleague, the Acting Shadow Secretary of State, the member for Wirral South, my honourable friend on the front bench today, previous shadow pensions ministers, including the late Jack Dromey, for all they did to engage with those pensioners, but they are still not getting the answers that they rightly expect to have. And I'll come on to the response that I've had from the Minister here today in due course. I want to turn briefly, Mr Deputy Speaker, to the recommendations in the DWP report, which I know the Minister is very familiar with. The 22nd recommendation in the report says very clearly, and I quote, financial assistance scheme members are likely to have more of their service before 1997, so are particularly likely to be affected by non-indexation of pre-1997 benefits. And the report says any improvements for PPF members should also apply to FAS members. Given the age of many FAS members, the government should legislate as a matter of urgency to provide indexation for pre-1997 rights, and the government should review the FAS, including looking at the case for removing other discrepancies in FAS compensation compared to the PPF. It also says, I think it's in point 156, quoting from the report again, like the Deprived Pensioners Association and Prospect, the Pensions Action Group, which has worked on behalf of these pensioners over many, many years, said that indexation on pre-1997 benefits is its priority. Most FAS members have the majority of their service before 1997, and most were in schemes that provided for indexation of between 3 and 5% on all members' pensionable service. Non-indexation of benefits means that the average FAS award, £2,700, is progressively lower than the amount expected from the original pension schemes. And it quotes Terry Monk, who said, people should get what they paid for, end of story. If people paid for it, they should get it. And that's a sentiment that I've heard over and over again from my constituents and others. Now, as I said, Mr Deputy Speaker, I've engaged with many pensions ministers. There's been many over the years while I've been in this House. And I had a letter from the Minister here today on the 18th of April on behalf of those I wrote in on behalf of. And it says, I'm aware of and welcome the report of the Work and Pension Select Committee into defined benefit pensions. These are complex matters which require careful consideration. Any solution needs to be balanced and take into account the interests of financial assistance scheme members and taxpayers who fund the scheme. Therefore, I am now actively considering next steps, and it says, with an aim to publish our response in early summer. So I do have to ask the Minister today, will he meet with me and my constituents and other representatives who've been campaigning on this for so long? Can he give us some timeline today for when he expects to respond both to the Select Committee but also to these specific points? And could he perhaps provide his department's estimates of the costs involved here, how those weigh up in different scenarios? This obviously affects thousands of individuals, and I've heard different figures quoted at different points for addressing the concerns. It'd be good to understand what his independent assessment is of that. Mr Deputy Speaker, I said it's a passionate case made by my constituents and by those affected. This was a very highly publicised scheme. The former State steel plant still currently, it's under new ownership now. It's still heart of my constituency. It's a very visible site in Butetown and in Tremorfa. Many of those affected live locally. They didn't get what they thought they were going to get. That has caused huge distress to them and their families. We do need to provide them with some answers, and I would urge the ministers to look very, very carefully at the case that they've made and indeed the findings of the Select Committee.
Thank you very much. Dr. Therese Coffey.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to speak in this debate, and I congratulate the Right Honourable Gentleman for securing it and the Backbench Business Committee granting it. This is a really important matter, no matter what age you are, and I appreciate today we're not here to talk particularly about state pensions. I would call on the shadow front bench to please desist from this scaremongering about what is happening potentially with state pensions. I think all parties now have committed in their election manifestos to have the triple lock, and it's something that has worked well in order to make sure that we are seeing fewer. So there's been a big uplift in the state pension since 2010, and that's something we worked on with the Liberal Democrats when we were first in coalition, and have continued with a couple of exceptional reasons. Once when we actually legislated to make sure that people could, through primary legislation, get the triple lock, and then again when we recognised the unusual situation that had happened with COVID earnings, but I know that pensioners are welcoming the significant increase with their very first state pension, most of them seeing that significant uplift this very week, just gone. I will give way.
I thank the former Secretary of State for giving way. She says that we shouldn't be scaremongering, but I think there are some very, very serious concerns. And would she accept that, as a result of the policies of the former Prime Minister, the Pensions Regulator report said that the mini-budget contributed to a £425 billion drop in pension funds assets. That's affected every pensioner and potential pensioner in this country. So would she not at least accept some responsibility for that?
I certainly won't accept the responsibility for that. I'm very conscious of the arrangement with the pension regulator, but also the situation that happened with LDI. And I think the Bank of England saw this as a risk in 2018, did nothing about it. But coming back to the very fact that the state pension is well trusted, well regarded, and it is scaremongering to suggest anything otherwise. Yeah. So in this, but I'm conscious that today is really talking about private pension schemes. I think one of the things that in my short time as Secretary of State for Health, what came up time and time again, and it's this government that addressed it, was to actually change a policy which the Conservatives introduced, which was about the lifetime allowance, or rather had reduced to about £1 million over that time. And while I appreciate that for many people that sort of pension pot seems a real mountain away in terms of trying to climb to get to that, actually for doctors, consultants and nurses, some nurses, this was proving a barrier to them continuing to work in the NHS. And I think it's a sensible approach that was taken, and I'm pleased that we have done it. But in terms, one of the things though that has constantly been the case is the generous tax elements that have gone into private pensions. And that's why we have had such a successful industry. And it's why there's quite a difference between that and many other countries around the world on what we do with in terms of what comes from the state directly and what comes through private pensions. But I wanted to also recognise it was the previous Labour administration who put into place the building blocks for auto-enrolment for the creation of Nest, and that was a good thing to do. And I'm pleased it was actually just over a decade ago that we started that journey of that. And contrary to the predictions, it was actually good to see how many young people did not opt out. And that is a huge success story, and that's why I share with the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Chairman of the Select Committee, my keenness to make sure that we get on with that consultation to which he referred, and I'm sure the Minister will answer. I appreciate there will always be concerns, I get this, about what impact it might have on jobs, and it may be we need a two-stage consultation, one about the age, one about the consideration about lower earnings level, but I think it would be good to get on, because I think everybody realises the sooner you start, the more you benefit, and that is a really important part of why auto-enrolment has been such a success. And I think some other changes that have been made in more recent years in legislation, the creation of collective CDCs, collective defined contribution schemes. Clearly, there is still some interest in that, and I think Royal Mail is the closest to potentially starting one. But I think we should try and see what we can do to advocate this as a role model for many institutions to do. And this is a brave comment to make in this speech, Mr Deputy Speaker. I actually wonder if we should lead by example as Parliament and start to see where the members of Parliament's pension scheme should move to this approach. And the reason being, I'm conscious that taxpayer does pay for our contributions through the government, etc. And we do have an uncertain career path by becoming members of Parliament, so I understand that. But what's good enough for us and that we're creating legislation for, good enough for others, we should also consider leading by example and actually giving some impetus to that particular kind of new legislative vehicle. As I say, I may not be very popular for raising that, and I'm conscious of some of the issues that have already happened with the McLeod judgment and similar, leading to this two-tier system which has now been rectified. But undoubtedly, this scheme need not be as complex. And that's why it's been important as well, and I'm pleased to have seen the changes that did happen in the Treasury, responding to calls from people, government departments like TWP, that have led to the opening up of through the Mansion House reforms, and to look at the consolidation of funds, and to consider aspects of super funds. Because ultimately, what we need from pension investment is a good return, so that our pensioners will be prosperous. That's ultimately what this is about. And that's why I think we need to galvanise what we're doing in this regard in order to make sure that is the case. I'm not one of those people who believes that we're going to retire in 75 or whatever, far from it. There is a rational end to that particular approach, but it's going to take some imagination. It's going to take not necessarily courage, but it's about to take coordination and collaboration to make sure that we do have a sustainable pension outcomes for the future. And I think this is where we can also start to learn from some other countries. And when I was in the department, I was very interested in what they do in Japan. And if I end up doing another PhD, dare I say, in the future, it probably would be about how they fund pensions or part fund pensions in Japan, recognising the ageing demographics that they have, but also and recognising that is the situation with our country too. So we shouldn't be doom and gloom about this. We need to innovate, but we can also look at what others have done to address this. One of the things that I think is really important is, and I guess this first came home to me, I started work in 1997, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I started work for a company called Mars Incorporated, and little known to me, I didn't realise how beneficial this was. I was actually on a final salary pension scheme, defined benefit, with zero contribution. I didn't have to contribute a penny. Now, over time, that did not become stay affordable for Mars, but it was something I had not appreciated, and I think that's why, to some extent, the auto-enrolment scheme is so successful. But I also learned during a particular job that I had there of the importance of making sure that employers are careful with how they manage the pensions on behalf of employees and the role of the trustees. And if we think back to Robert Maxwell raiding the pensions, I know that Mars had sold a business to his company, and that it had gone wrong about the pensions. And it's perhaps unusual, people may not be aware, in the 2P process, pensions are not included, they're specifically excluded, recognising that would be more limiting potentially for a sensible company M&A to happen. But I'm conscious that it's perhaps something that people don't really think about till much later in life. So coming back to the reforms, why are they necessary? Well, the trustee is so important in this, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I had hoped that we would have a year of the trustee campaign, and I think it's reason why is because for I think a lot of people it's quite an interesting role to have. I've never been one, I must admit. I have expressed interest in the past, but it's also heavily involved in regulation. And I think there is a risk that at times it can perhaps be overwhelming for people who are not well versed in necessarily all the ins and outs, but they've wanted to become a trustee because they believe in the people with whom they work, who worked there before, and also being mindful of the future too. And it is really, I know, drummed into trustees about their fiduciary duty. And I think the risk that has happened, in particular with the defined contribution, where candidly there is no expectation of what the outcome will be, what has ended up happening is that fiduciary duty has hammered home and led to low risk approach, low cost approach, very low cost, but very low return. And that is not what we should be trying to do. No wonder people are buying other homes, becoming one-person landlords, because they see a fixed asset and they know that they'll be able to sell that in the future and they can make a reasonable expectation. Whereas at the moment, people are putting money into their pension pot with not really a huge sense of what that could buy them in the future. And while we've changed the law so you don't have to put everything into annuity and so on, it still is, I think, a matter of concern for me, and why I'm very keen. I'm conscious there have been some issues with the pensions dashboard, and I hope MAPS will solve that, and perhaps the Minister can update us on progress in that regard. But I think it's vital that people do start to be looking at this, not just as they're about to go to their retirement. So what are the benefits of the reforms, and why is it that we should be making sure there's sufficient professional advice? But dare I say, those intermediary advisors quite often are the ones who are getting quite significant fees, but still recommending that people go for gilts, still recommending pretty low returns. And there is a different way, and I hope that the reforms that we have seen will start to be taken up by the industry, who, by the way, asked for them in order to take full advantage and recognising the issues ahead. And we now need to see that aspects of the legislation that we changed and a variety of consultations in that way, that we start to see that have an impact, because that is really the reason we did it, was to improve prosperity for pensioners now and for the future. So I'd be keen to hear from the Minister if there's any news in that regard, in terms of what we're seeing in the trend in the market. In terms of one of the things that, in particular, I would like to say the local government pension scheme should be leading by example in this regard. And I know the government has put a greater demand on them in terms of levelling up, but it is vital that we make sure we see that change. The second part of pension schemes that I just thought it would be worth raising, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is I wonder if people in this chamber know quite how many trillions of assets there are in UK pensions alone. And the answer is about £3 trillion. Now, there are organisations, I think, like Make My Money Matter, who are trying to encourage people to make sure that they use that their pension pot of the future to make sure we have a planet that is also thriving. And while I do not agree with the divestment approach, it is important that we do have those companies invested in energy of today to be investing of energy in the future. And without that support from pension funds, we will not get that necessary investment. But I do believe that pensions are a superpower for prosperity for people and the planet. And I was really pleased when we introduced the regulations to do with disclosure of climate alignment to the Paris Agreement. And I would like to go further and encourage, as I have already done to the Secretary of State, to bring forward the same regulations that apply to climate change and alignment to net zero to nature. And there's already work started, TCFD happened for carbon, our regulations, and by the way, I think we were the first in the world to do this. We can do the same for nature, and TNFD is a good comparison, and I know that the International Sustainability Board is looking at that, and I think we're close to getting that outcome. So while I appreciate the Minister may not have considered that recently, and he may not be able to respond, I want to encourage him to do that. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we only have a certain amount of time where I hope the length of us claiming our pensions in the future will be longer, of course, and as science appeals. But we want to make sure, as I say, that we have a prosperous future. And it is that superpower element that I would also want to turn finally just to praise Nest. And I think Nest have done a great job. They were set up just over a decade ago. They're now managing a huge amount of money. I think there's even room for them to expand potentially through the consolidation. I know that the PPF is a pension protection fund, is potentially looking at doing that as well. But I know that they are leading by example. They are the pension firm that is starting to invest in the energy of the future. In fact, they have a substantial proportion of their funds doing that, rather than just relying on gilts and the similar. Let us make sure that Nest is truly celebrated. Let us make sure that we try and get more trustees being prepared to not just, of course, fiduciary duty has to be their number one priority, but also to recognise they are responsible to make sure the returns for those contributing to DC schemes are as aiming to be as good as what you could get with a defined benefit. We need to release the market, we need to protect people as we have done, but I have to say, pensions being the superpower is not necessarily the sexiest thing to say in this chamber, but it's one of the most important decisions that we have made with legislation in recent years, and we need to continue that momentum.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all thank and commend the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland for leading today's debate. I attended his Westminster debate, his half-hour debate by the way, and supported him at that time, and he outlined in those 30 minutes or 20 minutes that he had very clearly the case, and he's done exceptionally well today in doing the same thing with much more detail and important. It is important to be here to discuss the importance of pension schemes and ensuring that they are properly understood and regulated. And there are still so many people out there who are misinformed or perhaps don't even understand how pensions work or what their purpose are. So I'm glad to be able to debate this issue. The chair of the Select Committee referred to auto-enrolment, and I want to, in my contribution, Mr Deputy Speaker, refer to that. The detail that the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland set out is exceptional, and it refers to a number of companies, and as did the Select Committee as well, and others have referred to it. But most people out there will attain a pension at some stage of their lives, and through employment we will actively be paying into it. One point I would like to make is the provision of pensions for our young people and what steps we can do to understand, which the chair of the Select Committee referred to. Again, this is another issue which I believe we should be taught within the Learning for Life and Work back home. It should be part of the curriculum, part of our focus. The Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland said that he had his first pension at 22 years of age. I had my first one at 18 years of age. My mother took me down to John Thompson. He's not here anymore, but he was a pension man in Ballywalter and was signed up, and I said, well, I don't need one. He says, oh, you do, and we did. You never would, of course, ever say no to your mum, and I certainly didn't, and I don't regret that. And then over the years, you find out you have other pensions that you've taken out as well, and all of a sudden they are quite valuable, and they're exceptionally good to have them. Also, when I was 18-year-old, my mother took me down to the it was then now the Danske Bank, then the Northern Bank, and opened an account for me, give me £10 to start that account, which way back in the 60s would have been quite a lot of money. I could probably have bought a wee mini car, I think, probably at that time. Not sure what state the mini car would have been in, but I think you could have bought one for about £10 or thereabouts. The point I'm making is it's important to save, it's important to have a pension. And when we ask young people to look at their futures, start to plan, but when it comes to things like pensions, savings and mortgages, there is little provision within the education system to teach them about matters such as these, and there should be, not the Minister's responsibility directly, but perhaps maybe he could give us some assurance that may become and should become a subject for the curriculum. I've had the conversation with my staff before on the importance of paying into pensions. My youngest staff member's response was exactly this. She bought her first house, saving almost a decade for the deposit, thousands paying for mortgage advisors, for insurance, for solicitors' fees, for lenders' fees, and just about surviving to live in the present. There's an expectation now that they must save in a pension for their futures, and that purchase of a house is such a critical factor that the pension perhaps takes a second place. So what steps can be taken in the present to ease those financial burdens on young people to enable them to see the benefits of taking advantage of their pensions? I recently asked a PQ, Mr Deputy Speaker, regarding consideration has been given to a potential opt-in scheme for young people under the age of 18. There is, I believe, a massive cause for this. Another two girls in my office have been working since the ages of 13. Obviously, age of 13 has been part-time, but it's still been working. And there are so many young people out there, those who are employed from as young as this, and this is why shouldn't they reap some sort of benefit for that particular time from that 13-year-old right through? I understand government is to make a change to the Extension of Automatic Enrolment Act 2023 to enable this to happen in the mid-2020s. And as we quickly approach this, perhaps again the Minister could give an update on this matter and where it stands. The last point I want to make, if I can, Mr Deputy Speaker, is in relation to pensions. Is that of the WASPI woman? I know it's not a subject for this, and there will be a debate, I think, coming up today fortnight in this chamber on that very issue. But I secured a debate last month in Westminster Hall in relation to this issue, which I understand is perhaps not the pension issue for today. However, the scale of this issue and the popularity it has attracted really highlights the importance of planning pensions. That's the point I wanted to refer to. The Minister will be aware that compensation is in fact owed, so given the nature of this debate, if I just could remind him very gently of how it is possible for lessons to be learnt in ensuring this does not happen again. The object whenever the Right Honourable Member set the scene, he referred to what went wrong and to make sure it doesn't happen again. So we would hope that through this debate and others' debates that the issue for the WASPI woman will never happen again either. To conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker, the incentive to save for the future must be there for people of all ages, not just for the young people, but for those in their 30s and 40s who voluntarily don't pay into their pensions as they don't see it worth their while, given the present state of the cost of living, etc., where there's many challenges upon your purse. And it's also worth noting that some employers match employee contributions, which some pay considerably more, and there are incentives there to be encouraged by. The incentive must be there for people to prepare for life after work, and I very, very firmly believe that this should start within the LLW career section of the education system. Learn them early, get them in the right way, as we often say, and prepare them for the world to come, and pensions are very clearly a part of that. Mr Deputy Speaker, thanks so much.
Hear, hear.
And contributions, Alan Dorrance.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and good afternoon. Mr Deputy Speaker, may I thank the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland for securing this really important debate, and also the Chair of the Work and Pensions Committee for their work in bringing this matter to the House. Mr Deputy Speaker, the subject of my contribution is going to focus on Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Pension Scheme. I know the Honourable Right Honourable Member for Shetland and Orkney mentioned others, including Shell and BP, but my contribution today is going to concentrate simply on what happened in my constituency, which directly affects more than 1,500 people who live in Ayrcarrick and Cumnock and neighbouring constituencies. I speak on behalf of my constituent, Patricia Kennedy, as well as 9,625 members of the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise UK Pension Scheme, which includes more than 4,000 members of the Hewlett-Packard Pension Association. These are mainly people with an average of 20 years loyal service, the bulk is which is pre-1997. They were promised a good pension. They expected a fair deal from a world-leading corporation that they helped to build, and now find themselves left with a raw deal. In general, their pensions now have less than 70% of the expected buying power. The background, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that in 1977, Digital Equipment Limited of Massachusetts, USA, opened a factory in Ayr. The company, known locally as Digital, was a major boost to the local economy, and indeed, other than the government, was one of the largest employers in Scotland, with a large, major production facility on the outskirts of Ayr. At the time, the Digital Pension Scheme was regarded as one of the best in the United Kingdom. Annual increases were discretionary, but pensions more than kept pace with the best pensions available. In 1998, Digital Equipment merged with Compaq. In 2001, that organisation in turn merged with Hewlett-Packard. And in 2017, Hewlett-Packard split and took Hewlett-Packard Enterprise over responsibility for the Digital Pension Scheme. Employees of Digital, Compaq and Hewlett-Packard joined and paid in to the pension scheme in the reasonable expectation that future pension benefits, which would have provided them with a reasonable pension in retirement, will continue to increase in line with the cost of living. Sadly, this has not been the case. Since HPE took over the pension scheme, there have only been 3 discretionary increases: 1% in 2004, 1% in 2008, and 3% in 2022. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, while presenting itself to its customers and investors as being an ethical company in the world, is taking advantage of the weakness in the UK pension legislation pre-1997. This has resulted in a raw deal for pensioners who now have an average pension of £9,700, which, when topped up with the maximum state pension, still results in a low-income living, as defined by the government. Regardless of the legality of this practice, being heartless, immoral and unethical, this is absolutely unacceptable by a major world corporation. In contrast, since 2002, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise has had an annual global net revenue profit of between $50 billion and $120 billion, totaling in that time around $1.5 trillion. And in 2023, the Hewlett-Packard chief executive was paid $1.3 million and a bonus of almost $2 million and a $15.7 million in stock options. Shareholders also got $1 billion in dividends that year. If other companies, far less profitable, can pay increases to their pensioners, surely Hewlett-Packard can as well. So you might ask, why don't they? The answer is simply because they don't have to. In fact, they don't even have to explain how they come to the decision they make each year, the decision-making process, what factors are considered, how pensioners' needs are represented, is all completely lacking in transparency, and there is nothing that compels them to change that. They have made this point for years. This is a deadlock. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm a realist. Whilst I can call upon the UK Government to put pressure on the US headquartered corporations, it is unlikely to break that deadlock. But I do think there is a way forward. On Wednesday, the 18th of October 2023, as previously mentioned by the Chair of the Select Committee, David Carson, a representative of Hewlett-Packard Pension Association, gave oral evidence to the Working Pension Select Committee on the Defined Benefits Pension Scheme Inquiry. The Hewlett-Packard Pension Association also made 3 written submissions to the committee, which feature in the committee's final report. In recognition of these oral and written submissions, the Working Pension Select Committee mentioned this evidence in paragraph 83 of the report and paragraph 9 of the conclusions. And they commented, some pension scheme members are dependent on discretionary increases to ensure their pension payments keep up with the cost of living. Where these have not been awarded, the effect has been, over time, to erode their standard of living. This can be particularly the case for those with rights built up before April 1997, when there was no general requirement to index-linked pensions or payment. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the pension regulator should undertake research to find out how many schemes have provision for discretionary increases on pre-1997 benefits within their rules, whether the discretion is for the trustees, sponsoring or employees, or both, the number of years in which they have paid discretionary increases on pre-1997 rights, and in the years they have not done so, the reasons for this. I therefore strongly urge the Pension Minister, the Government and the Pension Regulator, as a matter of urgency, to complete this research, which I believe will then make it undeniably clear that an ethical code of conduct is required to ensure collaboration between companies and trustees on developing policy and strategy for pre-1997 discretionary increases. Mr. Deputy Speaker, clarification is also needed from the Government on the interpretation of matters included in section 221A of the Pensions Act 2004, as inserted by paragraph 2 of the Schedule 10 of the Pension Schemes Act 2021, which states, the trustees or managers must determine and from time to time review and, if necessary, revise a strategy for ensuring that pensions and other benefits under the scheme can be provided over the longer term. That could be central to breaking this deadlock. If discretionary increases are viewed as other benefits within a pension scheme, then it follows that companies and trustees must work together to revise a strategy for ensuring that pensions and other benefits under the scheme can be provided over the longer term. We also need the research to be done by the DWP and pension regulator, a code of ethical conduct to be developed, clarification from the government it is the intent of the Pension Act 2021 is that companies and trustees must work together to revise a strategy for ensuring that pensions and other benefits, which included discretionary increases under the scheme, can be provided over the longer term. I appreciate the Minister may not be able to provide clarification on these matters today, but I would be grateful for a written response in due course. Finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, although this debate is about a general debate on pensions and has focused on private pensions, no debate on pensions would be complete without mentioning the greatest pension injustice ever. That, of course, is the 3.8 million WASPI women, including 6,800 in my constituency, who were not informed by successive governments of the changes in the age that their state pension will be payable. For 9 years, the government have ignored the plight of these women. The government hoped the WASPI women would go away, but they have not, although unfortunately 40,000 are dying each year without getting any form of compensation, with some 240,000 having already tragically passed away, including my constituents Margaret Meikle and Morag Sain, without receiving contribution. I would therefore also urge the government to urgently progress and support the private members' bill tabled by my constituency neighbour, the Honourable Member for Kilmarnock and Loudon, which had its first reading earlier this year, requiring the Secretary of State to publish proposals for a compensation scheme for women born between the 6th of April 1950 and the 5th of April 1960, inclusive, who have been adversely affected by the increase in the state pension age. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I want to start by congratulating the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland on securing this debate and for opening proceedings this afternoon. I know this is a subject he's spoken about passionately in the House before, especially in relation to the BP and Shell schemes and other oil and gas schemes, and decisions that have been taken which are not in the best interests of members, but because of other concerns. I admire his knowledge and determination in supporting those who have been affected by adverse changes to their pension schemes. My good friend, the member of Cardiff South and Penarth, so passionately raised the issues of his constituents, the Allied Steel and Wire pensioners, and the need that the government carefully consider the DWP Select Committee report. And I do hope that he will meet with the Honourable Member and with their constituents, and that they can update the Honourable Member who so doubtfully put forward their case. Now, in a previous life, I worked as a trade union official and represented many members in pension disputes, so this is an area of which I also have some experience. I also want to thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting the debate and colleagues for their valuable and insightful contributions. Young people are frequently and quite rightly advised to start planning for their retirement as early as possible. And when people make plans for the future, they do so in good faith. Effectively, a contract is created between employer or the state and employee to provide for an income to be paid in later life. While it would be naive to think that nothing could change over the course of the intervening decades, when enrolling in a pension scheme, people make decisions about how they are going to afford their retirement. And the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland has spoken previously in this place about emotional representations he has received from people affected by the changes to the BP defined benefit scheme. And I'm sure nobody here could fail to be moved by the words of a dying BP pensioner who has been told his window will no longer be protected from inflation, despite previous reassurances. Pensioners are, after all, pension is, after all, not only a means of income while we are alive, but also a way of providing for loved ones after we are gone. My Lewisham Deptford constituency is perhaps not so well known in the oil and gas world, but I too have a constituent who has been affected. And when they contacted me last year, my constituent outlined how, in practical terms, BP's decision to override the recommendations of its pension fund trustees meant the pension of some 60,000 individuals in the UK had declined in real terms by 11% in just 2 years. So for an individual in their 60s on an average pension, this 11% cut equates to a loss of income of around £60,000 across their retirement. And some 16,000 of the individual affected are in their 80s and 90s. And it's not a great leap to assume that many may be in poor health and have faced spiralling energy costs over the last few years. And this is just an example of the huge impact that policy changes can have on individuals. At this point, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will turn to the wider pensions landscape. There are three main types of pension in this country: defined benefit, defined contribution and the state pension. All have been touched on at various points during this debate. But we've reached something of a critical moment in pensions policy. The last far-reaching review of the UK's pension system, carried out by the Pensions Commission, reported in 2005. Since then, the UK has weathered a global financial crisis, a pandemic, and the highest levels of inflation for almost 40 years. Over the same period, home ownership rates have fallen, and there has been a big rise in self-employment, and thanks to the gig economy. In short, the way people are or aren't saving for their retirement has changed, and we need to determine whether the current pensions landscape is still working. And this is why in November, my honourable friend, the member for Leeds West, announced a wide-ranging pensions review. And our review will look across a whole sector. It will set out proposals to ensure individuals get the best possible returns, as well as identifying the barriers to pension funds investing more into UK productive assets. Perhaps a quick review of the track record of Labour and the Conservatives will provide further evidence of why Labour is best placed to do this. Under the last Labour government, pensioner poverty halved. 1 million were lifted out of poverty. So how are things going under the Conservatives? On their watch, 1 in 5 pensioners now lives in poverty. Gas and electric bills have rocketed. Mortgages and rents have gone through the roof, and more older people are renting into retirement. Increasing numbers of pensioners are relying on their hard-earned savings to get by. Analysis carried out recently by Labour has shown that the state pension is the main source of income for over 6 million people. Women over 75s and single pensioners would pay the heaviest price if the Tories cut the state pension to fill the 46 billion tax black hole created by their unfunded proposal to cut national insurance. It will see the pensions cut by £96 a week, or pensioners paying more in tax. Proof that you can't trust the Tories with the state pension. And in the midst of a cost of living crisis which is hitting pensioners hard, the government is also failing to ensure families are getting the support they are entitled to. Up to 880,000 eligible pensioners are not claiming pension credit. And when we look at various workplace pensions, our analysis shows that average pension pots are £6,300 smaller than they would have been had wages grown at the rate they did under the last Labour government. A worker on average earnings can expect to have amassed a £70,600 pension pot since 2010. However, if wages during that period had grown at the rate they did under Labour, the same worker would have built up a £76,900 pot. Working people will feel the cost of Tory chaos for years to come, with the government's failure to make work pay wiping thousands off the average and pension pot. And all of this before we got to the broken promises on the triple lock and the billions the Right Honourable Member for South West Norfolk wiped off pension funds with a disastrous mini budget. We may not represent the same party, but I hope the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland will agree that older people are paying a heavy economic price for the mess created by the Tories. The number of people aged over 65 will increase from 11 to 14.5 million over the next 20 years. We are living longer. 1 in 4 babies born today will be around to celebrate their 100th birthday. And yet the Centre for Ageing Better says that a financially secure and healthy later life is becoming increasingly unlikely for millions of people. Labour's record on pensions is clear. We lifted 1 million pensioners out of poverty. We introduced pension credit, boosting the incomes of the poorest pensioners, a disproportionate number of whom were women. And as the Honourable Member for East Ham rightly pointed out, we created auto-enrolment, which brought 10 million more people into workplace pensions and gave them a level of retirement income they otherwise never would have. And the triple lock, which has been vital in protecting pensioners' incomes and providing security. When the Tories broke it in 2021, we campaigned against. Under Labour, the triple lock is safe. And furthermore, we will never put the nation's financial stability at risk by playing fast and loose with the economy. We will tackle the cost of living crisis head on and ensure that individuals have the security they deserve in the future. And we will give future pensioners the ability to prepare for retirement with confidence by creating more, better paid jobs in every part of the country, helping people get into, stay in and get on in work, and champion decent second pensions for all. Pensioners, along with everyone else in the country, need change. Labour has a plan to grow the economy, put money back in people's pockets, make work pay, and be the party of pensioners again. And although it's not within the Minister's power to call a general action, perhaps he could have a word with someone who can.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Pleasure to be here today, and can I thank the member for Orkney and Shetland and the Backbench Business Committee for allowing us a second outing on this issue within a few months. I think we can all agree that occupational pensions are crucially important. Many hard-working people across the country depend on their occupational pensions for an income in retirement, and they spent years paying into their pension scheme. The member today spoke powerfully, I think, once again on the situation that his constituents are facing, and he referred to others as well, and I thought he spoke powerfully about the situation as he saw it. And so I think all of us have constituents. We've all got examples of those who have done the right thing, worked hard, contributed to their occupational pension scheme. So it matters to us all, I think, that they get what they have been promised when it falls due, as set out in the rules of the scheme. Now, when we last debated this back in Westminster Hall in January, I did make the point I would not speak about specific schemes, and I won't do so today. I'll end up commenting in more general terms. But comment I may make about the generality of the issue should not be taken as an oblique commentary to any of the schemes mentioned in the debate today, no matter how tempting it might be for some. Since the debate in January, the world has indeed moved on, and I've tried to take some steps as well. Some have already referred to, we published a consultation on options for defined benefits in February. This consultation reflected a new funding landscape where funding levels are generally high, many schemes were in surplus, and the consultation sought feedback on proposals to make surplus extraction easier where it is safe to do so. The model for a future public sector consolidator operated by the Pension Protection Fund. The consultation is now closed and we're currently analysing those responses. It only closed a fortnight ago, so we're not quite there yet, and there will be a government response in due course. But I think I can be clear today that better outcomes for savers lies at the heart of our proposals. And I stress, given the comments we've heard today, the proposals around surplus sharing are there to include a range of safeguards as the starting and foundational principles to ensure that member benefits are protected. The occupational pensions over the course of
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way, but can I just impress on him the need to ensure that if changes of this sort are to be made, and I can understand the attraction of it for governments and indeed for corporates, but if these changes are to be made, then the first protection has always got to be for the beneficiaries. If there's to be flexibility for government to get investment in big infrastructure projects and corporates, then that is something that is to be encouraged, but it should never be at the expense of the pensioners themselves.
I'm grateful for that comment. That's very much the view and the spirit in which I'm approaching this issue. It's been discussed at great length by the sector at roundtables I've been present at. It's been a very strong theme that I've heard, so I'm acutely conscious that's the lens through which I'm looking at this issue. I can assure him of that. The regulations on the new funding scheme were debated and approved by the House. I will indeed.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, the Minister. He did say that things have moved on since January. Could I gently remind him that it was in January that he told the Select Committee that he was waiting to hear from his officials who were in discussion with the Cabinet Office about the AEA technology pension scandal. He's since been saying that there is no timeline for how these people are going to be advised of appropriate redress. Does he expect there to be no timeline between now and the general election, or can they expect a definite answer at some point before then?
It's preempted a topic I was about to come on to, because I could see it was going to come up in the discussion on the Select Committee report in any case. I have now been to see the Cabinet Office Minister with my officials. The officials have then gone back for a second visit. So whilst I cannot give him a timeline, what I can say to him is that I am nudging this issue along as rapidly as I can. But when I say it is complex, it is because it is complex, not merely because that's a usefully convenient word to cover a multitude. So we continue to work as fast as we can to try to get a conclusion to this. And I hear the points he has made to me both in this place and indeed outside, that we want to try to draw this to a conclusion as best we can. The regulations I referred to on the funding and investment strategy clarify what prudent funding plans look like, allow open schemes to take account of new members and future accrual, and make it explicit that there is headroom in the regulatory environment for schemes to invest more productively, require all schemes to be clear about their long-term strategy to protect member benefits. DB funding levels have indeed improved in recent years. It's important that schemes take advantage of the opportunities this brings. The scheme funding regulations will help schemes get the most from their assets, whilst at the same time ensuring that scheme members can be confident that they will receive the benefits they are promised. The regulations embed good practice and build on the existing funding regime for DB schemes by providing clearer funding standards which will ensure, as far as possible, that schemes are properly funded over the long term. Scheme members can and should be confident that the regulations provide increased security for their promised pensions, which is important to many of the people the Honourable Member is trying to support through this debate. In addition, the new General Code for the Pensions Regulator has also come into effect since we last discussed these issues. The new General Code consolidated and simplified 10 of the existing codes to make it easier for trustees and those running occupational pension schemes to find the information they need on the regulator's standards of conduct and practice. It came into force at the end of March this year. Now, I will do my best to try and reply to some of the points also raised in the debate before I continue further. I'm grateful to the Chair of the Select Committee for covering many of the issues in what I thought was a very helpful report on the DB schemes. I know we often discuss Select Committee reports in this place on a Thursday, and quite right we should do so. Normally we do it after, though, the government has issued its official response to that committee report. So if you will forgive me, I won't preempt every recommendation in that report, but I can assure you I sat down for a marathon session with my officials not so long ago, going through every last sentence in that report. So it's getting full consideration by me, I can tell him that. But I think it's worth noting that both he and the member for Strangford mentioned the auto-enrolment reforms, and I can happy to place on record today our ongoing commitment to consult in the mid-2020s on that issue. I'm keen to make progress. I hear all around the chamber there's a recognition of why it is important that we make as rapid progress as we can. He also mentioned the lifetime provider consultation and has already summarised the general tone of the contributions very well. There have been more responses to that consultation than any other that have been during my time in the department, certainly. I've read most of them myself rather than just waiting for the summary, so I've also absorbed the similar mood of music that he has done, and so I hope we can have a proper government response very soon on that. The member for Carn.
And thank him for the attention he's paying to our recommendations in our report. On the auto-enrolment review recommendations, does he envisage the consultation on implementation happening this side of the election?
No decision has yet been taken on when that might be, and it would be wrong for me to speculate at the dispatch box as to when something might occur, but as I said just now, I'm very keen for it to happen as soon as we can manage that. The member for Cardiff South and Penarth rightly raised his constituents and the AWS pensioners. As he may be aware, if he read the evidence sessions that I appeared on in front of the Select Committee, I have met with the pensioners, listened very carefully to them, and whilst this might, unfortunately, I always feel it sounds like a cliche when I say it, but I listened carefully, I commissioned work on the back of that meeting, I received that work, I reviewed it, I then commissioned some further work on the back of that, and the policy development process is ongoing. I am happy to meet him, and I noticed he asked for a timeline. He'd actually just read out my timeline when he quoted my reply to him for the 18th of April, so he's answered his own question almost. As I say, I am happy to meet with him and the pensioners, but I will caution them that I doubt I can say very much more at this stage than I've already done so you may want to consider whether at what point he wishes to have a further meeting, given I know it's a long way for them to come from South Wales to hear me say what I've already just said to them a few months ago now, but I am working hard on that. The member for Suffolk Coastal, I spoke eloquently about the potential value of CDCs, not least in this place, and I cannot wait for the Royal Mail one to get off the ground. I also welcome her comments on the importance of employers doing right by their employers, and we should always note just how many do actually do that. She asked for an update on the pension dashboard. As I'm sure this place knows, there was a reset to the pension dashboards shortly before I arrived in the department, and I have taken a close personal interest, having overseen a few rail infrastructure projects in my time that were also needing a bit of a reset, and both myself and the Chief Executive of Money and Pension Service, Oliver Morley, are taking a very careful, scrupulous and in-depth interest in the progress that this is making. I'm satisfied that we're making good progress. The timetable for connections has now been issued, and I think we are very much on track. The member for Strangford and indeed the member for Eyre Carrick and Cumnock mentioned WASPI. I'm not sure there's much I can usefully add right now because I don't think this is a debate for it. I note the comments that have been made. Entirely understand them. He will be aware, because he mentioned it himself, there is a debate coming in this place very soon. That's an important part of the engagement with Parliament that the Ombudsman themselves have identified. I look forward to hearing what members will have to say. how much time do I have available? I will do my best just to cover a few issues just around discretionary increases, if I may, because I think it's important just to put on record the legal situation, which is that there are clear legal requirements for schemes to provide indexation on all defined benefit rights accrued after 1997 and on GMP rights accrued between 1988 and 1997. Some pension schemes do go beyond the legal requirements and they provide more generous indexation. If higher levels of indexation are set out in scheme rules, those levels of indexation must be paid. The scheme rules set out the pension package that the members have the right to receive. Some schemes indeed do provide additional indexation on a discretionary basis. In some cases, these may have been paid regularly in the past, but they are not part of the pension package promised by the employer. Rather, they are and remain by definition discretionary. I understand the frustration that this will cause to pension scheme members no longer receiving such discretionary increases. And during the previous debate, our committee is looking closely at the situation to better understand whether the arrangements that we have in place are working as intended. That commitment still stands, and I've recently met with the pensions regulator to personally discuss this issue. And with many of the other concerns that were raised back in January, and indeed some of those raised today. But I have to stress that legislation doesn't and can't seek to set out exactly what every scheme must do in each and every circumstance. The legislation sets out some minimum standards for indexation that does not prevent more generous arrangements, which may be brought into the scheme through its rules or provided on a discretionary basis. But those arrangements are the concern of the scheme trustees. Government sets a minimum legal requirement which trustees and sponsoring employers can exceed if they choose, if they judge that the scheme can afford it in the short and the long term. It is extremely important to achieve a balance between providing members with some measure of protection against inflation, but not increasing schemes' costs beyond what most schemes can generally afford. Trustees, whether of big firms or small firms, must have an eye to the future viability of their scheme. I'm very grateful to all members who have contributed today. It's been a wide-ranging debate, partly because it's been called pension schemes. It means it can cover a multitude beyond the more precise issues that I know the member for Orkney and Shetland has been raised. And I'm grateful to all who have participated today, and I commit to working much harder on this issue in the future because I know how important it is to so many of our constituents.
2 minutes. Alistair Carmichael to wind up.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. When I contacted the Speaker's office this morning, I was told that there was only myself and the Honourable Member for East Ham down to speak. So I'm delighted that we have had a good debate. We've had contributions from no fewer than 10 members. Given what's happening elsewhere today, I think that is quite significant. A number of members have made reference to the WASPI women, which I didn't in the course of my remarks because it was not really germane, but it is a point that is well made and that I would very much associate myself with. The Ombudsman took long enough to get a report on that, and now we need to get on and honour it. Otherwise, what is the point of having an Ombudsman in the first place? The function and purpose of debates such as this is to ensure that the concerns of our constituents are heard in government, and the presence of the Minister on the bench today is an important symbol of that. Consider though the companies to which reference has been made today: BP, Shell, ExxonMobil, Hewlett-Packard, Allied Steel and Wire, some of the best known high street names in the country. And I hope that what we've heard today will be heard also in the boardrooms of these and other companies, because the people who run these companies should understand that we are watching what they're doing, that they have an obligation to treat their former workers, their pensioners, fairly. And if they do not have it within themselves to do that, then those of us in Parliament and Government will make sure that they have to.
The question is as on the order papers. May I say aye? Contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.